I am just bringing people in now. Hey, how far did you read after we met yesterday?
Um, I read I read until this one part where there was a woman and a guy and they were married and apparently the woman was cheating on her husband, but he wasn't or she wasn't apparently because she didn't know who the person was, and then Yosharian was discussing who the person was. And then he asked someone else who the person was and the person didn't know him, and then I skimmed the rest of it because it got too confusing.
Yeah, it does get confusing. So that was the part where Dr. Nika was telling the story about how he got punched in the face?
Yes.
Okay. And who else do we have on the line today? I see iPhone. Hello.
Oh, it's me, Juan.
Oh, hey, Juan. How are you today?
Good.
Good. How far are you in the reading?
Not really. I haven't really started reading, honestly.
Okay. Well, I would recommend it only because I don't know if you heard Lena say this just now, but the characters right now we're still in kind of the exposition part where we're getting to know all these characters. But there's a lot of them, and they all talk fast and they all talk over each other, so it can get confusing. Uh,
Oh, probably like more like one of the stories that was confusing for me was the Macbeth one, and there's a lot of characters.
yeah, exactly. So as you get started, if you have questions about the characters, we talked yesterday about making a character map. I haven't looked online yet, but we can do that today if you want to. But if you have any questions, just go ahead and let me know. I'll help you.
All right.
Lena, did you look for a character map yet?
No, I haven't.
I'm going to do a quick search right now and let's see if anybody joins us. But I'm going to see. Seems like somebody should have. Catch 22 character map. Let's see what comes up. Huh. There's one on Wikipedia. Hey, you know what? I'm going to put this in the notes or in our chat, and that way you can have a look at it. So it's not really a map, it's just a list, but I think that'll be helpful. And you can see there's like 1,000 of them. And some of them obviously like they just show up once and go away again. Um, but some of them come back over and over. So, where would the two of you like to pick up? I'm going to give you first choice while we see who else joins us. Do you have any preferences?
No, I don't. It don't really matter.
Okay. Well, if you have the, are either one of you looking at the course blog at the text?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to put that up. Actually, no, I'm not. Maybe I will. Where can I find that again? May 7th. So I'm going to put it up on the screen also. And give me a sec to find the section. Because there's one passage in this part that's going to be pretty important. So, Lena, did you want me to start at the beginning of that section so that we can track that story? Or did you feel like you got it and you don't want to go over it again?
Section 5?
Yeah.
We can go over it again. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please.
That that way, if you have any questions, you can ask along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and that way we'll be able to track it together. Okay, can you guys see that now?
Yes.
Okay. Juan, can you see it too?
Yeah.
Okay. And Juan, you're welcome to follow along on the screen, or you can follow along on the blog if you had that open. Either way is fine with me. So Chief White Half-Oat. Dr. Nika lived in a splotched gray tent with Chief White Half-Oat, whom he feared and despised. I can just picture his liver, Dr. Nika grumbled. Picture my liver, Yossarian advised him. There's nothing wrong with your liver. Well, that shows how much you don't know, Yossarian bluffed, and told Dr. Nika about the troublesome pain in his liver that had troubled Nurse Duckett and Nurse Kramer and all the doctors in the hospital because it wouldn't become jaundice and wouldn't go away. Dr. Nika wasn't interested. You think you've got troubles? He wanted to know. What about me? You should have been in my office the day those newlyweds walked in. What newlyweds? Those newlyweds that walked into my office one day. Didn't I ever tell you about them? She was lovely. So was Dr. Nika's office. Now, yesterday I talked about this, and so I'm just going to skim this part real quick. Dr. Nika had a nice office and a good practice, and then he lied. See where I'm highlighting here? He said, I was 4F. That means that he wasn't medically eligible to serve in the military. But basically, he was lying. He said, I examined myself, and I discovered that I was unfit. You'd think they would have trusted me, but they weren't trusting me, and they sent this guy around just to make sure I really did have one leg amputated at the hip and was helplessly bedridden. Well, obviously he's got both of his legs and he was working hard, so he was lying. But then he says, I can't believe we live in an age of distrust. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing when even the word of a licensed physician is suspected by the country he loves. Well, the guy's a liar. So then Yossarian brings him back to the story. What virgin? I thought you were telling me about some newlyweds. That's the virgin I'm telling you about. They were just a couple of young kids, and they'd been married a little over a year when they came walking into my office without an appointment. You should have seen her. She was so sweet and young and pretty. She even blushed when I asked about her periods. I don't think I'll ever stop loving that girl. She was built like a dream and wore a chain around her neck with a medal of St. Anthony hanging down inside the most beautiful bosom I ever saw. It must be a terrible temptation for St. Anthony, I joked, just to put her at ease. Well, he says just to put her at ease, but that's a horrible thing to say, especially from a doctor. Her husband said, Who's St. Anthony? Ask your wife, I told him. She can tell you who St. Anthony is. Who is St. Anthony? He asked her. Who? She wanted to know. St. Anthony, he told her. St. Anthony, she said. Who's St. Anthony? When I got a good look at her inside when I got a good look at her inside my examination room, I found she was still a virgin. I spoke to her husband alone when she was pulling her girdle back on and hooking it into her stockings. Every night, he boasted. A real wise guy, you know. I never miss a night, he boasted. He meant it, too. I even been putting it to her mornings before the breakfast she makes me before we go to work, he boasted. There was only one explanation. When I had them both together again, I gave them a demonstration of intercourse with the rubber models I've got in my office. I've got these rubber models in my office with all the reproductive organs of both sexes that I keep locked up in separate cabinets to avoid a scandal. I mean, I used to have them. I don't have anything anymore, not even a practice. The only thing I have now is this low temperature that I'm really starting to worry about. Those two kids I've got working for me in the medical tent aren't worth a damn as diagnosticians. All they know how to do is complain. They think they've got troubles? What about me? They should have been in my office that day with those two newlyweds looking at me as though I were telling them something nobody had ever heard of before. You never saw anybody so interested. You mean like this? He asked me and worked the models for himself a while. You know, I can see where a certain type of person might get a big kick out of doing just that. That's it, I told him. Now you go home and try it my way for a few months and see what happens. Okay? Okay, they said, and paid me in cash without any argument. Now, do you follow what the doctor's doing here? What's this conversation about?
Their life,
Well, yeah, and specifically, here's the uncomfortable part. The husband had been bragging about how they'd been having so much sex, but the doctor, when he examined the wife, found that she was a virgin. So something wasn't happening the way that they were saying. So he's actually teaching them about the physiology of sexual intercourse. Now, they leave the office. A few days later, I'm down here now, he came back all by himself and told my nurse he had to see me right away. As soon as we were alone, he punched me in the nose. He did what? He called me a wise guy and punched me in the nose. What are you, a wise guy? He said, and knocked me flat on my ass. Pow. Just like that. I'm not kidding. I know you're not kidding, Yossarian said, but why did he do it? How should I know why he did it? Dr. Nika retorted with annoyance. Maybe it had something to do with St. Anthony. And I just realized, as long as you can both see the screen, why am I doing all the work? Who wants to read? Lena? You want to read a little bit?
Where are you at?
See where the purple is?
Got it.
Go for it.
Dr. Nika looked at Yossarian blankly. St. Anthony? He asked with astonishment. Who's St. Anthony? How should I know? Answered Chief White Huffote. Staggering inside the tent just then with a bottle of whiskey cradled in his arms, sitting himself down. I don't know how to say that word.
That's a good word. Pugnaciously. Pugnaciously means like he's almost ready for a fight.
Pugnaciously between the two of them. So Chief would fight Dr. Nika and Yossarian?
It was more of like an attitude, like he just sat himself down right in the middle of them like he owned the place.
Like an act?
Yeah, kind of. You know how some people walk into a room and they just seem to have an attitude about them?
Yeah.
That's the spirit.
Okay. Dr. Nika rose without a word and moved his chair outside the tent, his back bowed by the compact kit of injustice that was his perpetual burden.
Perpetual?
He could not bear the company of his roommate. Chief White Hoffoot thought he was crazy. I don't know what's the matter with that guy, he observed reproachfully.
Mm-hmm.
He's got no brains. What's the matter with him? If he had any brains, he'd grab a shovel and start digging. Right here in the tent. He'd start digging right under my cot. He'd shred oil in no time. Didn't he know how that enlisted man struck oil without a shovel back in the States? Didn't he ever hear what happened to that kid? What was the name of that rotten bastard pimp of the snot-nose back in Colorado? Wintergreen. Wintergreen. He's afraid, the Syrian explained. Oh no, not Wintergreen. Chief White Hoffoot shook his head with undiscussed admiration.
Undisguised.
That stinky little punk wise guy. I kind of don't want to say that.
Okay.
Ain't no afraid of nobody.
Right?
Doc Danikas is afraid. What's the matter with him? What's he afraid of? He's afraid of you, Yossarian asked. He's afraid of you're going to die of pneumonia?
Pneumonia.
Pneumonia. Okay. He'd better be afraid, Chief White Helford said. A deep, low laugh rumbled through his massive chest. I will, too, the first chance I get. You just wait and see. Do I keep going, or?
You can. Juan, do you want to read a paragraph?
Sure, but where can I find it on the blog? Because I can't really see it that good on the.
Oh, okay. Well, don't sweat it. I'll read for a little bit while you find it, but you can find it in the May 7 preview post.
Oh, okay.
So I'll pick up where Lena left off for now. Chief White Half-Oat was a handsome, swarthy Indian from Oklahoma with a hard-bowed face and tousled black hair. And if you can mute your microphone for a sec, or actually I'll take care of it because there was getting some feedback. Who, for occult reasons of his own, had made up his mind to die of pneumonia. He was a glowering, vengeful, disillusioned Indian who hated foreigners with names like Cathcart, Corn, Black, and Havermeyer, and wished they'd all go back to where their land's ancestors had come from. You wouldn't believe it, Yossarian, he ruminated, raising his voice deliberately to bait Dr. Nika, but this used to be a pretty good country to live in before they loused it up with their goddamn piety. Chief White Half-Oat was out to revenge himself upon the white man. He could barely read or write, and had been assigned to Captain Black as assistant intelligence officer. How could I learn to read or write? Chief White Half-Oat demanded with simulated belligerence, raising his voice again so that Dr. Nika would hear. Every place we pitched our tent, they sank an oil well. Every time they sank a well, they hit oil. And every time they hit oil, they made us pack up our tent and go someplace else. We were human divining rods. Do either one of you know what a divining rod is? It's what they use.
No.
Oh, you know one?
No.
They use it to find water. So basically, Dr. Nika or Chief White Half-Oat is saying that his family, for whatever reason, was lucky enough that wherever they went, they were like oil finders. Our whole family had a natural affinity for petroleum deposits, and soon every oil company in the world had technicians chasing us around. We were always on the move. It was one hell of a way to bring a child up, I can tell you. I don't think I ever spent more than a week in one place. His earliest memory was a geologist. Every time another white half-oat was born, he continued, the stock market turned bullish. That means it went up. Soon, whole drilling crews were following us around with all their equipment just to get the jump on each other. Companies began to merge just so they could cut down on the number of people they had to assign to us. But the crowd in back of us kept growing. We never got a good night's sleep. When we stopped, they stopped. When we moved, they moved. Chuck wagons, bulldozers, derricks, generators. We were a walking business boom, and we began to receive invitations from some of the best hotels just for the amount of business we would drag into town with us. Some of those invitations were mighty generous, but we couldn't accept any because we were Indians, and all the best hotels that were inviting us wouldn't accept Indians as guests. Now, if this paragraph were being written today, would they probably say use the word Indians?
No, not really.
Probably
No,
be like more like Native Americans or.
exactly. So you can kind of get a sense from the language in this book that it was written back before people were sensitive to those kinds of issues. At the same time, look at the next sentence. He says, racial prejudice is a terrible thing, Yossarian. It really is. Now watch what he says here. I'm going to read this, but I don't feel good about it. It's a terrible thing to treat a decent, loyal Indian like a nigger, kike, wop, or spick. Ouch. Now, I know you know how inappropriate it is to call an African American that name, right? What you may not know is how terrible. Well, I mean, look at the last word in there. Do either one of you feel good about seeing that one in our community?
I don't even know what that means.
Right, because it's hard. It's hardly ever used. It's short for Hispanic,
Oh.
right? You may not know this one. WOP is short for without papers, right? WOP. And that was used to describe Italian immigrants to America. Kike, K-I-K-E, is a very also offensive term used to describe Jewish people. So each one of those words is like its own knife to a community of people. But he says, like a total double standard, racial prejudice is terrible. And then he says, like, he's like a total racist to use these terms. Chief White Half-Oat nodded slowly with conviction. This is another example of a double standard in the book. It's intended irony, right? That a person saying, you know, racism is terrible, and then he talks like a total racist. Then, Yossarian, it finally happened, the beginning of the end. They began to follow us around from in front. They would try to guess where we were going to stop next, and would begin drilling before we even got there, so we couldn't stop. As soon as we began to unroll our blankets, they would kick us off. They had confidence in us. They wouldn't even wait to strike oil before they kicked us off. We were so tired we almost didn't care the day our time ran out. One morning, we found ourselves completely surrounded by oilmen waiting for us to come their way, so they could kick us off. Everywhere you looked, there was an oilman on a ridge, waiting there like Indians getting ready to attack. It was the end. We couldn't stay where we were because we had just been kicked off, and there was no place for us left to go. Only the army saved me. Luckily, the war broke out just in the nick of time, and a draft board picked me up right out of the middle and put me down safely in Lowry Field, Colorado. I was the only survivor. Yossarian knew he was lying, but did not interrupt Chief White Half-Oat, went on to claim that he had never heard from his parents again. That didn't bother him too much, though, for he had only their word for it that they were his parents. And they had lied to him about so many other things, they could just as well have been lying to him about that, too. He was much better acquainted with the fate of a tribe of first cousins who had wandered away north in a diversionary movement and pushed inadvertently into Canada. When they tried to return, they were stopped at the border by American immigration authorities who would not let them back into the country. They could not come back in because they were red. It was a horrible joke, but Dr. Nika didn't laugh until Yossarian came to him one mission later and pleaded again, without any real expectation of success, to be grounded. Dr. Nika snickered once and was soon immersed in problems of his own, which included Chief White Half-Oat, who had been challenging him all that morning to Indian wrestle, and Yossarian, who decided right then and there to go crazy. Now, here is where we get the title of the book. This next passage is the important one of the day. You're wasting your time, Dr. Nika was forced to tell him. Now, Yossarian was going to him because he didn't want to fly a battle mission, because he didn't want to get shot at, because he didn't want to die. Makes perfect sense, right? Until we see it this way. Can't you ground someone who's crazy? Oh, sure, I have to. There's a rule saying I have to ground anyone who's crazy. Then why don't you ground me? I'm crazy. Ask Clevenger. Clevenger? Where is Clevenger? You find Clevenger and I'll ask him. Then ask any of the others. They'll tell you how crazy I am. They're crazy. Then why don't you ground them? Why don't they ask me to ground them? Because they're crazy, that's why. Of course they're crazy, Dr. Nika replied. I just told you they're crazy, didn't I? And you can't let crazy people decide whether you're crazy or not, can you? Yossarian looked at him soberly and tried another approach. Is Orr crazy? He sure is, Dr. Nika said. Can you ground him? I sure can, but first he has to ask me to. That's part of the rule. Then why doesn't he ask you to? Because he's crazy, Dr. Nika said. He has to be crazy to keep flying combat missions after all the close calls he's had. Sure, I can ground Orr, but first he has to ask me. That's all he has to do to be grounded? That's all. Let him ask me. And then you can ground him? Yossarian asked. No, then I can't ground him. You mean there's a catch? Sure there's a catch, Dr. Nika replied. Catch 22. That's where we get the title. Anyone who wants to get out of combat duty isn't really crazy. There was only one catch, and that was catch 22, which specified that a concern for one's own safety in the face of dangers that were real and immediate was the process of a rational, sane mind. Orr was crazy and could be grounded. All he had to do was ask. And as soon as he did, he would no longer be crazy and would have to fly more missions. Orr would be crazy to fly more missions and sane if he didn't, but if he was sane, he had to fly them. If he flew them, he was crazy and didn't have to. But if he didn't want to, he was sane and had to. Yossarian was moved very deeply by the absolute simplicity of this clause of catch 22 and let out a respectful whistle. That's some catch, that catch 22, he observed. It's the best there is, Dr. Nika agreed. Now here's where I'm going to stop for the day, because does that make sense to you guys?
So they try to test them to see if they're actually crazy or not?
Well, kind of, but really what they were doing was trapping them. Think of it this way. If you come to school, we have a pandemic, right? And we
Yeah.
say the only way that you can get out of going to school is if you're crazy. No, wait a minute. I had that backwards. It's confusing. I even got it backwards. The only person that would go to school right now during the pandemic would be crazy, right? You wouldn't want to go to school right now. You'd get sick. Make sense?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So far, so good, right? So the
Yeah.
only way you go to school is if you were crazy. But if you asked not to go to school, you would be considered not crazy. And then you would have to go to school. You see how it doesn't make any sense? Like you're trapped either way. So if these guys don't want to fly the missions, well, that makes perfect sense. Who would want to fly the missions and die? But that means that they have to fly the missions now because they're not crazy. So they're
Makes sense.
trapped. Sorry, Lena?
That makes sense.
It makes sense, but it's cruel, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a terrible policy. So I'm going to leave it here for today because I'm going to make the reading, or sorry, the post about that one, and it's going to take a little bit of thinking. Does either one of you have any questions before we go?
Uh, Catch 22 is just a phrase, or is that like an actual like thing?
See, here's where it gets brilliant. The author made it up. It never existed before, but the book became so popular, and the idea was like so simple that everybody kind of went, we've never really had something to describe this before. So the phrase catch 22 became a thing because of this book. So now, ever since this book came out, whenever someone's caught in that logical trap, they describe it as a catch 22.
I get. Oh, okay, okay. I get it.
Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought Catch 22 was just like a little code name for like a jet or something. I don't know.
No, it was something that Joseph Heller completely made up as a way to express what happens when there's an impossible policy, and to do it you'd have to be crazy, but to not want to do it you wouldn't be considered crazy, and therefore you'd have to do it. You're trapped.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah, right. So let that sink in a little bit. I'm going to put the post up on the course blog now. It should be up in the next 20 minutes or so. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. Otherwise, I'll see you here tomorrow, 1:00.
Alrighty. Thank you.
All right. Take care, you guys.
Yeah, you too.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.